Okay, so we're going to do a quick screencast here of the lesson we did in class. Because I have no participants, this might be quicker than you need. If you need more help, please ask questions when you get back to class. So we're talking about solving percent problems, and first of all, this document is in Google Classroom, so please make sure you have a copy of it, and you'll get a hard copy when you come back to school. So questions number 1 and 2 we've already done, so it's the third one that we're going to be talking about today. So if we look at the first question, it says, given the whole and part of the whole, find the percent. So we're actually given a question that is a fraction, and we have talked about this before. So 16 over 25, and you're just trying to find a percent. So if you know how to turn a fraction to a percent, you know what you're doing. So 2 ways we've learned that. First way is get 10, 100, or 1,000, so we can multiply each of these by 4 to get 64 out of 100. So that will give us 64%. The other way that we've learned that is that you do the numerator divided by your denominator, and then you take that value and you multiply that by 100. So this is all review. What you need to remember here is when you're reading a word problem, you're looking for them to ask you to find the percent. In other places, they will ask you for a number, not the percent. Okay, so that's just a quick review of that. So let's take a look now at given the whole and the percent, find part of the whole. Okay, we've also done this one. Let's click that screen out of there for you. So we've had to find what is 5% of 60. So we're trying to find part of the whole. 65 is our whole, so this is our 100%, right? We're trying to find what would be 5% of 65. So we know that we've learned that you turn this into a decimal. Of means multiply. And so we're going to multiply that by 65. And you're going to get an answer of 3.125. And that makes sense because that's a pretty small number. 5% is a small amount of 65. So in this scenario, 5% is 3.125. 100% is 65. So we were asked to find part of the whole, and it gave us 65 as the whole. The next question we're going to do is going to ask us to look at finding the actual whole, and that's the part that's new for us. So let's skip to the next screen. Alright, so this is the new percent problem. Given the percent and part of the whole, find the whole. And it's not always going to be worded like that. So let's try and break it down a little bit. So what this question is saying is 6% of what number is 18? Basically it's saying is 6% is 18. What would be 100%? Right? Because this would be our whole. So there's a couple different ways that we can do it, and I'm going to show you 2 today. So one of the ways would be to set up a proportion. So I know that 6% means 6 out of 100. And I'm going to set up a proportion. So what would 18? Is 18 going to be 6 or is 18 going to be 100? Well, we know the question says 6% is 18. So I'm going to line those up across from each other. And this is where my unknown comes in. So 6 over 100 is equivalent to 18 over what? Well, there's a couple different ways I can look at this. The first way I can figure out, how did I get from 6 to 18? Well, I can see that if I multiply by 3, that is going to give me 18 and 300. So 6% of what is 18? Well, we just calculated that, and we found out that 6% of 300 is 18. And that makes sense because 6 is a small amount, so is 18. It's 3 times smaller, and the same with 100, 3 times smaller. The other way you can do it is you can use something that's called cross multiply and divide. So if we just take these little symbols out here, you can take 1800, multiply it by, 18 times 100, and then divide it by 6. Because not always is it going to work out neatly that you can multiply and have something that's neat and tidy, like 6 times 3 is 18, or is 18. So in this case, we would do 18 times 100 equals 1800. And then we would take that 1800 and we would divide it by 6. And we get 300. So this is a mathematical calculation that will always work. So even if you don't have neat and tidy numbers here, you can work with this type of calculation, and that is called a proportion. And we're going to look at that in the next slide. The other way to look at it is to use something that's called the 1% method. There's also some decimal calculations you can do as well, but I'm just going to show you two different ones today. So the 1% method looks at the values that are up here. 6% of what number is 18, and it thinks about, well, if I can find 1%, then I can find any percent in the whole world. So if I have 6% is 18, what would 1% be? Okay, so that's my question mark. So in order to get to 1%, I know that I need to divide 6 by 6 to get 1, and whatever I do to one side still applies. I'm going to divide by 6 here. So 6 divided by 6 is 1%. 18 divided by 6 is 3. So 1% is a value of 3. So in order to get to 100, I just multiply that by 100, and it's giving me 300. The 1% method is always going to work for you. So I recommend that one. The proportion method won't work if you have to find a different, for example, in this case, if it asks us to now find 23%, all we would have to do is multiply that 3 times 23. The proportion method won't give you that as easily. So let's look at this here. Here's an example of each of these types here. So in the first one, setting up a proportion, again, we're recognizing 25% of what is 80. So I'm finding this whole. I want to know what is 100%. So if I'm going to do a proportion, I have 25 over 100 equals 80 over 100. Or sorry, 80 over what? We're trying to solve that. So I know that I can cross multiply and divide this. So 80 times 100, I can multiply by that and divide by 25. So 100 times 80 equals 8,000. And then I can take 8,000 and divide that by 25. And my answer is going to be 320. So if I go back here, I can see my proportion is 25 over 100 is proportionate to 80 over 320. So my answer, 25% of 320, is 80. So let's take a further look down here. Now let's look at the 1% method. The screen is not working out great. I'm going to pause for a second here. Okay, now let's go back to the 1% method. I just had to move some stuff around. So the 1% method, if I'm going to be finding 8% of what number is 72, let's get back here for a second, then I'm basically saying 8% is 72, and I want to know what is 100%. So if I want to find the 1% method, use the 1% method, I'm going to divide both of them by 8 to be able to figure out what 1% is. So that means that 1% is going to equal 9. If I want to figure out what 100% is, then I'd simply take 9, I multiply it by 100, and I'm going to get 900, and then I feed back that into my answer. So 8% of 900 is 72, and then you got to think about, does that make sense? Yes, it's less than 10%, so 70 would be less than 10% of 900, which would be 90, so that does make sense to have an answer. And here's how it makes sense if you're going to do something else. One question could be, 8% of what number is 72? Let's just erase this here. What is 20%? So if I know, and I use the 1% method to find out all of this, that 1% is 9, then I can just take that information and I can do, well, 9 times 20 equals 180. So then 180 is 20%. And that's how the 1% method will work in multiple situations. Okay, let's look back here for a second. These are two that I would like you to try and figure out. The second one, 131.7%, is greater than 100. So we have done strategies working with numbers that are bigger than 100 as well. When you're working with decimal places, you want to go to at least 2 places after the decimal. So just be aware of that when you're working with that. Anyways, you can rewatch the screencast back. If you have any questions, ask me when you get back to class. Thanks. And sorry for the stops and starts. There are lots of announcements today.